stopping us, what are the blockers, and what is the market fit. And we're going to do these for each of the dApps. I suspect we'll be predominantly talking about influence, but we'll keep doing these meetings until we've got a very coherent project management set up for that's the funnel from what the DAO wants through to the development layer that goes ahead and makes it. So yeah, I'll dive quickly into a review of what and this is very brainstormy at the moment, but yeah, we were talking about this is what influence does at the moment. I think it's a signaling tool primarily. Signaling is the idea of that you as a DAO participant can almost, effortlessly signal your preferences to the DAO. And that's basically what the original intention from influence was, to, in this very emergent way, capture what everyone's thoughts and feelings are. It's also, I think, probably the only NFT gated quadratic voting tool out there. Snapshot does it, but ours is purpose built for quadratic voting first. I think won't excite as many people, but to me it's groundbreaking, is that we've got a tool that actually is a research tool in itself. You can capture weighted preference and dialogue from an open-ended group of people in a short period of time, and that's actually incredibly valuable. I think most of what will make DAOs successful is their ability to generate social consensus. I think that's what makes them different from companies. They might get user feedback, but they don't seek to build consensus across the user base and inform what they're doing based on consensus. And in a traditional company, or if you're in the kind of lower rungs of a hierarchical organization, no one cares about what you think. And I think that's what's different about DAOs, and influence allows you to build social consensus. It's also got this process of, and this is a kind of underappreciated problem that DAOs will have, certainly when they get busier, is that in decentralized spaces and in kind of more emergent collaborative spaces, everyone's got an opinion. And consequently, you've got all these divergent opinions, you've got lots of noise. And the way that influence works is that it takes that noise and creates and acts as a filtering mechanism, finding signal in the noise. We're viewing influence as essentially like our freemium dApp, where it's a totally free gasless voting experience. There's no cost to using it after you've minted an ID in our case, but we're also looking at totally free entries into that. It's a kind of feedback tool. I think this and the subsequent apps in our second layer governance suite, what I call decision-making tooling, I think, yeah, it's a consensus mechanism. It also does binary voting. It curates list. One of the original sort of taglines for this was that it was decentralized content curation. It allows you to create mini DAOs by whitelisting subsets of an NFT base. So one of the things that we can do right now is say, I want ID 10, 21, and 165, etc., 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 to be in this group that is the data DAO, for example, which again is an incredibly useful affordance for decentralized governance. Yeah, I think that's been covered in some of the other ones. The other one is, and again, it's a cognitive technology. Using it influences the way that you think, which again is probably the thing that got me most excited about it several years ago now. Used in practice, it makes you think about the options and forces you to put things in priority order in a way that you wouldn't have normally done. Yeah, it generates acceptance is an interesting one. I think there's the notion of legitimacy. Any good decision, if passed as a sort of democratic process, people, even if they disagree with it, even if they say, I don't want that to go through, they will accept it because it's legitimate. All right, I don't like that one, but everyone else does, so fine. And I think I've certainly seen elements of that when using these tools, where you get the vote outcome and you think, I wouldn't have voted for that, but fine, yeah, I'm on board. And again, very important feature of a voting tool that I think is happening now. Works as a better snapshot. I think super critically, I think that's true in some areas with the display of our NFTs and the use of NFT gating and quadratic voting. I think there's things that Snapshot does that ours doesn't yet. They've integrated POAPs with people really, which I think we might integrate something. I've been very interested in a long time and actually got involved with some Mozilla groups, and Ksenia has as well, talking about digital badges, and that's what POAPs are, they're digital badges. I'm keen to integrate badges or something like POAPs into it. So there's I think we can. I think there's a number of fronts we are better than Snapshot, but I don't think it's a home run just yet. Yeah, I think sense making is another feature of this, and helps engage the community in decision making. I think that's pretty much all of them. Does anyone have any suggestion of what it does now that we haven't captured yet? Someone talking there? Can't really make it out.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Do you have anything that we're missing on what influence does now? Or is it just an open mic? Any other things that has cropped to people's mind that we think influence does now that we haven't captured on here? Yeah. So I guess we need a box with what it doesn't do, and it doesn't do private voting yet. It is something that Yubi and I have been talking about for a long time, and Yubi's been researching zero knowledge proofs and StarkNet and these other kinds of technologies. We want to get there, and we actually think we've got a exceptionally interesting way to do that in the future. It's certainly not going to be in the launch package, but I think we've got to digest properly what that is. What is that effect? What is radically open voting? I'm not overly sure that it's a bad thing. It's almost like an iterative consensus process. What it does is make it more valuable to vote later in a vote than it does, and it might lead to some effects where people go, "Oh yeah, they've almost been influenced by the prior voters." But then I think it is called influence, so maybe that's what we want. I don't know. But private voting as importance is something that we'd want in the future. I think it's just out of the scope of this initial bit.
I was going to say this is less of a sort of software feature of what it does, but something I've definitely noticed with the sort of new Shibaku users using influence for the first time. I think it empowers people and makes them feel part of something and gives them sort of ownership over a project, like in a meaningful way. Like they feel like they're actually having an effect on something that they're involved in. And I think that's a huge feature to me.
Yeah, powers DAO members, and I think it creates community coherence.
I think the speed in which we action things after votes and Shibaku as well is a big part of it, because they can see their vote take form immediately, and I think that it just encourages more participation, and so I think the whole streamlined way it's managed and can be actioned quickly is a huge plus.
Yeah. So this is one of the things. It does encourage participation, and I think it could do it better, but it does, encourage participation as well. Any other thoughts? Anything we've missed?
From a technical point of view,
I think you've glitched out on the push to talk there, perhaps.
Give me 1 second.
And if you don't feel like jumping on the
All
mic,
right.
feel free to add them to the general, and I'll put them in here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
So one of the best, when you're doing like research questions, which was my old industry, it is always best to separate the enunciation of the proposal from the options of the proposal, so that when you're looking at the text itself, we can randomize the options and remove some bias. Right now, it's just one text file. And so no matter how you read that proposal of the vote and influence, you're always going to see the options in the same way, which is
Actually,
going
I
to
think
influence
it
the
does
vote.
randomize at the moment, doesn't it?
It randomizes the bottom part, but not the top part.
If you wanted the proposal to be randomized.
So the proposal text is okay, but when you give it the options, the order that you're giving the options on the proposal stage is going to influence the results.
Oh, I see.
That part needs to be randomized. Where you vote randomizes.
That the way in which the options are articulated in the proposal should be randomized.
Yes.
The implication being that the first one you read will be the most important. Yeah, there has to be, I agree and disagree. When you go to the ballot, which is randomized, and we have thought about that, because there is this kind of first item bias, which is a classic research methods problem, which is almost impossible to get around practically in normal paper-based polls. So we're winning on that front. But normally you would go to the ballot and then you look back at the proposal. And at that point, you're viewing them in a randomized fashion. I'm just thinking technically that would be a huge challenge, and I'm not sure the utility would be
From a technical point of view, all you need is 2 text fields instead of 1. So you have the top text field is the proposal itself, and then a secondary one is just for bullet points that you can then randomize, like paragraphs. There you can randomize the order.
So let me jump into the next text box, which is what we want it to do for launch. What I'll do is add proposal option randomization in there, and we can scope it out. I think it's certainly desirable. It could be trivial, like you've said. It could be messy. But yeah, it implies that we have a standardization to the proposal structure, which is you have to articulate each ballot item in a specific section of the proposal. So we have a new subsection of the proposal space where you create a tag and then say what it means, and then that is randomized. Yeah, it's certainly possible. What I'll do now is say where our heads are at for what we want it to do in 12 weeks' time. It should be said that this is a kind of desirable list. Our intention is that the development will obviously go on throughout the year and beyond. This is the beginning of Influence 2.0, and there will be 3.0 at some point, perhaps later in the year. But yeah, I'll whiz through these and say where our heads are at, where we want it to be.
Sorry, Nick. Before you go through those, can I make one more suggestion?
You can.
I was working with Lizzle this week and last week on some of the basic KPIs for influence. And we were looking at the result of a vote in terms of total points accrued, number of individual wallets that actually voted for that, and then averaging that out. I don't know if you guys spoke about that already.
Briefly, what's the suggestion?
The suggestion is that we actually display the other 2 metrics, the average score of that vote per wallet and the number of wallets, so that you can find out which ones are really niche and sort of small minority votes that are really like passionate about that, versus votes that are just lots of people voting massively, versus votes that's lots of people just voting a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there's a phenomenal amount of post-vote analysis that we can do, and I think we've got an app in our roadmap called Dashboard, which there is a dashboarding functionality for all sorts of deep analysis of the votes that we could get into. And then, Naomi, what do you think about dashboarding functionality as a target for this?
I think there's 2 pieces. Just one request. Demian, would you mind muting your mic when you're not speaking? Thank you. Or anyone else who's got background noise. Thanks. So you can currently see in the app how many addresses have voted. That's the votes list. I think we could have a few more stats displaying in the version we release now for the launch, even before we get into dashboard. So actually, when we discussed this morning about having a more detailed votes list that would give you a few more stats in the vote, even when you're looking at that initial page before you go into a vote, so you could see which votes are getting more people, which votes are having a more disruptive time, how the vote is spreading across all of them, or if there's one clear winner from the beginning. So I think we could decide on a few key points people want to see before voting, because there's also the question of what do you tell people before they voted. We initially had the vote results hidden until the end, which is another question.
Yeah.
Like that can also influence your vote. So there's a question here of how much information to display while a vote is live and how much then you can display once it's been closed, and there you can start doing analytics.
Yeah, so I've added additional voting statistics, open and closed.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have to be very careful there. And actually, I think in the current version, the aggregated vote is visible while the vote is live, and we need to decide whether we want to continue with that, or maybe it's one of the parameters you can choose when setting up a proposal.
Yeah. Okay. And I think I conceptualize data DAO having that job of deciding what is so the work you're doing there is a precursor to that. If we find an exceptionally useful statistic between now, although I'm suggesting we wind down markets and yield from go to zero inflation, influence is zero inflation to all intents and purposes. So actually, we'll be aggressively using influence over the next 12 weeks in a view to informing how the development trajectory. So if there is an exceptionally useful statistic at the end that we want to add into the vote display, absolutely, that can go in. Statistics are relatively easy to make, so yeah, absolutely, why not? So what I'm going to go through each of these, and if anyone's got any suggestions that we don't have included yet, and again, this is a list of desirables or dream things. They're not necessarily all going to go into V2, and one of which is, one of the things that we do is creative content votes. So what's the best meme? What's the best infographic? Etc. etc. We want the ability to be able to have almost like a gallery-like view in the proposal, where no one has to jump out to a separate platform in order to view the content, which should be feasible, but there's lots of approaches to do that. And we ended up going down that rabbit hole a little bit, but Naomi's going to do her magic on that and think about how that can be done. The other is, Liz suggested, which I thought was a great idea, which is once a vote is completed, we have this opinion feed, which is what all the textual descriptions of why people voted, the justifications. Which opinion is it that people actually think is a really good one? So people either support or don't support opinions. Can we have a additional layer of sorting on the opinion feed, which sorts them by almost consensus on the opinion list, which I think will be very interesting, a bit like the way Reddit works. The vote mining idea, this was incorporated into the design, or proposed to be in the design, to incentivize and break voter apathy. And the sort of vision for this is that each vote can have a different amount of incentive to vote. And so I think we can get some token economics stuff integrated into that. If you haven't looked at it yet, you should check out our London experiment that we did mid last year, which is we literally created influence and did this in real time practically. And I Naomi and I produced this beautiful PDF which aggregates all the data from all the votes into a PDF. We can do this automatically from the JSON files, we think. So it'd be really great if you get this digest in a document format of all the votes. How feasible that will be might be something that we can throw out to the DAO to create. The other is, we talked about, I think Senya brought this up, that I've been in this position too, where I really want to say, hey, go and check this out. And someone can come in and vote and experience what it's like to do a quadratic vote. And at the moment, there's a heavy barrier to entry for that, which is you need a FET ID or need to be holding some FET. So we want to be able to spin up spaces where people can, with a very low barrier of entry, come and play with the tool and see what it's like. So a kind of showcasing space. To follow on from that, we want to be able to, maybe on a test net, have people mint IDs and use the ID gated version on a testnet version. So the kind of next step up from that showcasing space. There's going to be a completely different look and feel. As a bit of history on this, we wanted to quickly get to the point where we've got a demonstration of quadratic voting, and we quickly threw this together. This app was never meant to really look like this long term. And yeah, I think Naomi said there is no design to it, which I thought was like an interesting way of putting it. But yeah, it was a very purely function approach to product design on this one. We literally threw it together in 2 weeks flat, I think. So we've got a whole design and look and feel piece to do on this. And I'm very confident it's going to look absolutely amazing when we do it, but we've got that to do. There was a conversation this morning on whether we should be mobile first or not. And we ended up with mobile friendly. That is, the app plays nicely in things like MetaMask DApp browser. We actually think there is the potential for a standalone mobile first app for this. I think once you've got influencers doing social token like votes and things like that, everyone's going to want a very beautiful mobile app to do that. But I think that's beyond the scope of this, certainly this 12-week run. But we do want it to play nicely with mobile and allow people to vote with mobile. We want some facilities for old votes to just get pushed out of the way. So once they're completed, they go into a kind of archive space. So when you come in, you see what the live votes are, and that actually creates a kind of scheduling system where you can just come in and see all the live votes, and they gracefully disappear. One of the things that I think really excited me a long time ago about this is that the ability to create vote follow-on votes for each of the individual tags. So as a kind of sense-making process, again, if the London vote is a good example of this, we voted on things like, what are the most important issues to you? Climate change, education, policing and crime, etc., etc., etc. It's very possible to do a follow-on vote where climate change is the top level tag. And then in that, there's now another vote underneath that, and they chain up, and it can be votes all the way down. I'd like that functionality to be in the next iteration. I think this gets us into the proposal system. So what we want, I initially conceptualized proposal to actually be a separate app, a bit like the way discourse is at the moment. But where our heads are at now is that influence, proposal, and decision all kind of come as a singular packaged app. They're sub apps to the main piece, which we might just call influence. But now we've got this, we want proposals to have a collaborative dynamic. So the workflow at the moment is people will go to Discourse, which is a foruming tool. Then they have this debate around the nature of a proposal and the wording of a proposal. Then that proposal goes to Snapshot. We want to integrate that within the voting tool and have a new proposal-based system that allows that process to happen in-app. And that unifies what at the moment the DAO workflow is 2 separate apps. We're gonna push that into a singular, and decision will be there, which will be the trustless execution piece, which will be our big piece of work for the latter half of the year. So yeah, at the moment we've got this issue where if you mess up and create a proposal, they're immutable. So you create a proposal and you've spelt it wrong, it stays there. There's no way to do it. So we need a mechanism for removing balked votes, essentially. But this does come with its own issues. For example, we don't want some proposer to come and put a vote in, see that the vote's going the wrong way that they don't want it to go, and then rub the vote out the way. So there needs to be some degree of immutability around it. And actually, I think buried in here somewhere, we've come up with this notion of draft votes, where there's actually a 2-stage process where people can create a proposal, make sure that it looks right, there's no one's had a hissy fit around something that's in it, or there's no mistakes, and then there's a commitment process. And I think those 2 things are related. We've also had a long conversation about the notion of template-like structures, where there's going to be several different kinds of quadratic vote that come up as standard kind of things that DAOs want to do. For example, creative content vote. Set up a creative content vote would be a template, and that creates that gallery look and feel space, and there might be 4 or 5 off-the-shelf vote structures. And we then got onto a conversation that we might want a kind of wizard-like process where you go through a staged UX, which is what's the title of your vote, what's the description of your vote, etc., etc., and it's worked through for the users in a wizardy type approach. We have a tool, we have this already, which is a suggestion box. Now, again, this is one of what I think is actually profoundly important when it comes down to polling systems and voting systems. People have been talking about this for hundreds of years. The problem with polling and the problem with voting is that whoever creates the vote, or whoever creates the questions of the vote, projects their values into there. You can create leading votes. There's always bias in any of these things. And actually the nature of what we've created here, and it's actually the reason why I created the semantic ballot voting idea, is that they can be completely emergent. So the example we were talking about is the vote that just happened on Shibaku, which is who's the best influencer. You can ask that question, but the vote creator doesn't know what goes on the ballot, because what goes on the ballot is by crowd suggestion. So the tags emergently created, which actually solves one of the major problems in voting dynamics. Next up, we don't want to simply recreate the current workflow in discourse, because what that is someone using whatever's lying around, which is an old school Web 2.0 open source foruming platform to do this, and it's created these kind of normative practices within the DGov space that are not necessarily optimal. The way that actual governance happens, deliberative governance happens, typically is someone creates a bill, for example, and then there's a sequence of amendments which are debated separately. And if they're accepted, those amendments are added to the proposal. So we're actually going to build in a amendment-like structure into the proposal creation, where there's an originator. The person creates okay, I propose this. That's the proposal thing. Then other people can come in and say, I propose this amendment. I propose amendment A, which is change this line in the proposal to this. And if that is accepted, it is essentially integrated into the main proposal. And we're actually going to use Git, which is a data structure under GitHub and GitLab, etc. It's an open source data structure. And again, I think that will be a huge jump forward in proposal creation process. A lot of details to be worked out on that, but amendment-like structures is the way forward, I think. Again, one of the other things that's used in discourse at the moment is that you do a kind of temperature check type thing where you say, okay, I propose that we do this. Before you go to a vote, there's a first layer of signaling from the community which detects whether people support it or not. I think we can integrate digital signatures into that, which means that we get Sybil resistance on that, which means you can't just keep spamming. At the moment, if you go to Discourse and everyone from MakerDAO to everyone else uses this, I can go into a MakerDAO forum without logging in even and vote up or down on those temperature check votes. So some degree of Sybil resistance is desirable there. Yeah, this whole piece was about the draft bit. We want a sort of preview of your vote before you commit to it. This will integrate. We're going to integrate the beginnings of the semantic governance idea. And what this means is that a DAO will define the scope of its decision making. So you will, for example, say, if we were talking about us, we would start with hashtag yield, hashtag markets, hashtag auction, and XYZ, whatever our starting list of tags is. And you can only make proposals about things that has an existing semantic tag, which draws a scope of decision making around what you can and can't discuss within the DAO. And that stops people proposing the utterly stupid stuff or completely out of scope stuff. So that'll be in there too. We would also like the ability for people to be able to say, oh, I've just voted, and now I want to go and share my vote. So this can be something as simple as a JPEG of your vote state. I voted 74531 on these things, and you just get a download of your JPEG, which you can then go and share on Twitter or something. And then those are the two bits we've just added.
Nick, I don't think I heard this, but it seems like it's a missed opportunity not to have a countdown to the closing of the vote. Right now we have 2 dates, but we don't have a clock that actually says you have two days or 5 minutes to end your vote.
I like that idea. I think, yeah, countdown till vote close. Yeah. I mean, so maybe what we can do is make sure there's endpoints from Influence that allow the creation of Discord bots. I'd like us to, in fact, we need this for integration for aggregators and bots. So, for example, if we've got a countdown, it would be relatively trivial actually for someone to create a bot that says /countdown and how long there is till vote close pops up in Discord as a pop-up. But there's also, I'm just saying, and there's also things like vote with tally, which is like an aggregator, and boardroom, and these other things that draw in data from Snapshot et al. And we want to be compatible with them. Go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
Nick, one of the other things that you were mentioning about creating a lower barrier to entry experience to this tool, maybe what we really need is a demo that also serves as a teaching tool. Have you looked through some data on influence? Most people don't understand that they can actually use all their voting power, or how negative votes work, or how it's almost like you want a self-running demo so that people could really truly understand the different strategies they can have or something.
Yeah, we did actually talk about this morning about having tutorial votes where you essentially get walked through with tooltips. We do get this effect where it certainly happened in the Stoner Cats votes where you've got people voting one because our minds are still in the one person, one vote space. So people just come in and vote one and then leave 99 voice credits. So yeah, I think a tutorial walkthrough.
Well, one of the Shibaku votes that I analyzed, 20 people out of 100 voted one vote.
Yeah, that's our conditioning coming through. But yeah, this can be offset with a kind of what is quadratic voting tutorial vote, which is actually a real live vote you can go through and do that with. Yeah, we've talked about doing that in the past. I think that's a great suggestion. Let's put it on.
Aligns with our idea of just shilling quadratic voting in general.
Yeah, we've got to recognize that this is a radically new way of voting and people are coming in cold to it. We've been playing with it for a year and you can forget that we're over the threshold of understanding what it is and what it does, and most people aren't. All people aren't, in fact.
Sorry, from a point of view of branding, is quadratic voting up for discussion?
Yeah, 100%.
Because it's not a noob-friendly term, let's be honest.
Oh, in terms of what it's called?
Yeah, even if we can just give it a branded name so that it differentiates.
No, this is totally bike shading, I think. And it's going to be super uncool because someone invented it and then we start calling something else. It's just not very open source.
I mean, we have done that with, we call it semantic ballot voting. And it's not quadratic voting, actually. Quadratic voting is, in its basic form, you buy votes, $1 per vote. And then actually there's modified quadratic voting, which is that there's a budget of voice credits. And then we've extended that into semantic ballot voting. Not sexy, it's a base descriptor of the name. I'd be open to renaming semantic ballot voting to something else if we wanted to. But that
I think finding a sexy name for it could really help to gain traction on it.
Yeah, and we've got the kind of branding messaging discussion tomorrow to get into that. But yeah, again, blank slate. I'm open to anything.
I don't know. I don't want to argue about it, but the formula is quadratic. So it will be like, I don't know. It just, to me, it sounds like a dangerous area when people come and put brands on. It's like calling a spreadsheet something else or something. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's some people who just hate the whole radical markets thing. It became very much an Ethereum culture thing, and that certainly influenced me. And some people hate it, and it could be a blocker for some people. But yeah, I agree with you. We don't want to go back to reinventing the wheel. There's voting methodologies land a name and they stick. First choice voting and so on. They just, it is what it is. But yeah, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. Has anyone got any other suggestions for what we want it to do for launch? Feel free to stick any suggestions in general if your mic isn't working or anything like that.
It could also, even if you don't have an idea of what it could do, if there's something you came across while using influence that bothered you or you found difficult or you found great, or any sort of feedback would be really helpful at this point.
Yeah, NFTA suggested we could change semantic ballot voting to just semantic voting, which I wouldn't be averse to at all.
Element of it.
I was thinking about what you said, Naomi, about the experience of using influence and the negative voting. It's not, or how it's interpreted in the app.
You cut out there in the middle?
Sorry, I was talking about the negative. And it seems to me really, I couldn't quite understand how it worked.
Yeah, I think what we discussed this morning, and I think it's what you said, like the tutorial, I'm thinking we need more like a showcase. And we discussed this earlier where pretty much anyone could come in and do the whole vote, and we'll have some kind of like helpful tips. Negative voting is a really interesting concept. So there's all these concepts within this that take a while to understand. But I think tomorrow in our messaging session, we should bring this up of like, how do we explain each of them in one sentence? That's always the way people want to hear it, like really quickly. So how does a negative vote affect it? It means it takes off from the total of the votes. So if you really hate something more than you like something else, then you can take off votes from that.
Yeah, it's actually a kind of fairly adversarial game where what you're doing with negative voting is taking other votes away from people and using your voice to do it.
Yeah, if you were like, I don't care about any of these, but just not that one. Like all of these are fine, but I really don't want that option. So you could put potentially all of your votes on that. So I think these ideas of tutorials, which is part of the messaging, will be a big part of the new branding initiatives.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Anything else that people might want to go into this? One thing we talked about earlier, I don't think made it into a little post-it here, was our opinion feed thing, which is, in white noise hell somewhere. Right. This, of course,
Sorry, Nick, one more thing that you've mentioned was that you could have topics of voting. One of the things that it was new to me was the airdrop vote having several different, I don't know if you call them iterations or phases, but not knowing if something is a final vote or having a special distinction for final votes could also be useful.
Yeah, there's a kind of notion with binding and non-binding. Now, technically, nothing on influence will be binding because we don't have the trustless execution piece yet. So the binding votes are that. But yeah, we certainly something, the vote, then debate, then vote, for example, that it's a first or second in the sequence of votes. Yeah, so I think let's add a piece here on vote sequencing if we want to get into that. But yeah, I think that's part of this kind of deliberative governance approach. But yeah, this is the vote 2 of 2 could certainly be added into that.
To the version tracking that Naomi just said too. So is there also the option, this is a small detail, of coloring on vote? I know when I vote, it shows red. Is there maybe a potential for design of, if the vote's been closed, if the issue's been closed, that's another, I know not to get difficult and add colors, but is that another indicator that's necessary or not? I'm still new to the.
We have a kind of legend type thing that says if a vote's open or closed on the panel. Is that what you mean, or something else?
Yes. Is there, going back to what we're talking about when the iterations of it, is there something that do we add something that lets you know that we're no longer talking about it, let's say, like the influence vote?
Yeah, so like the issue is closed sort of thing.
Resolved, maybe. Like, because closed is like the vote is closed, but we could also have executed. So on the on-chain versions of these kind of things, you have open, closed, and then executed. So yes, different stages. We could like that could be another option. And
I think that's that vote sequencing thing.
Yes, this was going to say linked into that, the vote sequencing.
What I thought you were going to say then actually was that, and this is another thing that we've talked about, is that to what degree do we allow DAOs create their own personalized space? Like, to what degree is it white labelable? What do you think about that now?
I think customization is important. The biggest competitor will still be Snapshot, and I've been watching. They are slowly allowing more and more customization of their spaces. I'm wondering if instead of just customization as in colors and logos, we can actually do something a little more unique where they can reshape the space.
Yeah.
So if each piece is like a module, it's actually like you would have a freeform visual website builder. You can actually add and remove sections or move them up the page or down the page.
Yeah, so I think there's this kind of, let's just leave it as a bucket called DAO customization.
But I feel like that will definitely be down the road. And I think it's actually a nice, like if we get all the functionality working and then we build in that piece so that we've already got customers on board at that point, others out using the software. And then we introduce, okay, now you can customize it.
Yeah, and I think that the customization piece is creating, like, with linked to their domains. I think DAOs certainly want to create a vibe, look, and feel that's specific to their DAO, and I think that's going to be a highly desirable thing.
Connecting to your domain will be huge because that is nobody else is affording that at the moment. But also allowing it to, they can save their own templates. So I feel like this fits into the admin piece when we do have fully fledged portal for the creators of proposals and you have permissions and roles. So this is like that stage where it scales.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's another desirable for this bucket.
I think we put it in just so we have it as a backlog, and then we're going to, or obviously sort these into kind of quarters and priorities, and also scoping them out. If there's something that's actually quite achievable in a week's work of development, then it might be worth putting it in.
Yeah, I agree. So what I'm going to suggest is we've got about 15 minutes left of this session. Is that about right? Start at 12:15, hour and a half. These two are very operational. What's required to take us there? What are the blockers and so on? This is precursor development stuff, and I think we need the devs on that conversation. But this final what is the market fit and what is the differentiators is an interesting question. So shall we get into that?
So we started talking, you and I, about the audiences.
Yeah.
So I think we could open this up to everyone and say, what kind of use cases, interesting ones, do you see people using this for? Because sometimes you'll find a use case and you go, actually, there's a feature that would be valuable to that use case. So we can go backwards from here as well.
So I think one of the things that I feel like is a differentiator for us is based on that what I'm calling decentralized content curation and us optimizing for that sort of use case.
So who would that be for if we just break that down a little bit?
I'm thinking NFT DAOs, and I'm thinking of things that the Stoner Cats have been talking about. For example, coming up with Easter egg suggestions for the cartoon, and like actually people going away and doing art for it and stuff, and art curation DAOs. It's mainly that rich
there's
media.
Almost two there, because there's creation, I feel, and you can co-create through this.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's curation.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you want to create a TV show through it and we all vote on what the next episode is and who the characters are and who are we bringing on to do that, and that's almost a production DAO, which is a little bit, and then you've got the curation, which is like maybe a group who are going to purchase NFTs together.
Yeah. And we're much more, I would say, NFT first / NFT DAO focused, which I think
which means you don't need to have a fungible token.
Yes.
So if we're going feature benefit, which is the kind of, when you do these products, you go, so that's the feature that we're NFT first, meaning you don't need to have a fungible token, meaning you don't need to get into the DeFi elements to run your DAO.
Yeah, which is I think this where the market will move this year. For me, this kind of market fit thing is, are we positioning the app at the right time for what people want now or this year? At least we want to be, people don't know what they want yet completely, but are we positioning the app to be timely in the space? And I certainly think an NFT DAO focus is, given the huge boom in NFTs, and many of them are putting in their roadmap DAO at the moment.
They're all putting it in their roadmap. You've got to have it in there.
Everyone is. So I think that's certainly something that we can shout about as striving for that product market fit.
Path to DAO for NFT projects.
Yeah, I like that. So we'll put an easy path to DAO. Yeah.
As well. So that's the feature would be like Synonymity. And then, if you want to shut down an idea, but you don't want to upset everyone.
Yeah, pseudo-anonymity. And I think the other thing is censorship resistance could get spicy.
How does censorship resistance come into play, you see?
Because and this is we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we could do this, is whitelist 20 major NFT series and ask them anything. And there's nothing that we can do or anyone else to stop people from sharing their opinion on that topic, whatever it is.
So this is basically not like Twitter.
It's not. It's basically, unruggable opinion. And this is a fundamental component of Web3, unruggable opinion. Yeah. I think there's the other thing is that this is most certainly our Web3 app. It's a case study Web3 app will be when we come out with it in 12 weeks. And I think we can frame it as that. I think it's democratic.
Sorry, one of the things you guys were talking a little bit earlier was about the path to DAO. Maybe this is an enabler to DAO.
Yeah, is that different than an easy path to DAO?
An easy path is something that you need to do, but it's just where you're going versus enabling it. It's the thing you need to have this. It's a must-have.
So it's it promotes people going down the DAO path who might not otherwise.
Yeah, but it's a push down the path then, because enabler almost has a negative connotation.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's to everyone.
So should we?
Yeah, I know there's a bit of a negative there, but the concept is what I wanted to get through rather than the precise word.
Okay.
What about promotes DAO adoption?
DAO Builder? Yeah, we talked about the DAO Builder the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a DAO Builder. This app is DAO. Like once you are using this app, you are running a DAO.
That's entry point.
I see it as the beginning of the rabbit hole. It's once you start here, then you're going to learn all about DAOs and how amazing they are.
Yeah, and it is a contested point. Is like there's many people who, we do and will say you do votes on your NFTs with this DApp and you are a DAO now. And there are many people who will say, no, without trustless execution, you're not a DAO. Without governance minimization, you're a DAO. And I'll be having that battle throughout the year, but for me, you are. But yeah, I certainly think this will allow, and I think this is we should nuance that with non-technical.
The only issue with the non-technical is that, yes, if you have a DAO treasury, you're still going to need to be able to execute the decisions made through influence. Sort of multisig.
Yeah, and it depends on, I think no, we're not, because it's not going to happen in the next 12 weeks. So I have a good idea for a design for that, but it's essentially involves building our own multi-sig architecture with zero knowledge proofs with an entirely different voting. So it's a big job. It's not going to be something that we're going to be able to do within 12 weeks.
So there's still an element of needing trust here, because you still have to trust the protocol to execute on the decision.
Yeah.
So like we did this, it worked really well with Shibaku, where we had the holders vote on the pricing and we executed it within the hour and it was their decision.
Yeah. And there's another element that we've not talked about, which is the reputation dynamic.
Are we going to build that in the next 12 weeks?
I think we could, which is a simple strategy which allows trusted members or a subset of members to allocate differential voting powers to subsets of the NFTs. So these 15 NFTs have 500 voice credits, and the rest have 100. That's certainly doable in that time.
So I was wondering if we should connect the logic of that to the vote mining logic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've also got the kind of additional parameter of people that vote on top choice.
If you remember, can you remember the take your positions conversation? It's in the white paper. This is something that kept me awake for weeks when I first got onto it, which is you can actually hybridize so if you, let's say every FET holder, regardless of their token stake, gets whitelisted one NFT, what that does is take you from a purely plutocratic to a purely egalitarian voting state, whereas regardless of how rich you are, everyone gets one vote, presuming people haven't sybiled their stacks across multiple wallets. Now, there is a middle point where actually you increase the vote power for an NFT based on token stake, but do so in a way that they don't get purely linear gains on every token. So what you have is you set a maximum amount of voice credits that people can have as 1,000, and then you stack them based on the order of how many tokens they've got, and everyone has a kind of layered voting power. I'd love us to be able to start experimenting with that.
I think let's maybe do a session on that with the community here, and we can maybe set up some like little test votes, even not through the app. We could even do them on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, we could hack them a little bit.
Yeah,
the other
I think it'd be interesting.
One of the things that I've been thinking, sorry.
It's not what I meant actually, but it's the delegation thing is something that's people are going to want.
Yeah, that's going to happen quite soon, I'd say. So what Nick was just talking about now is actually slightly more like
Two things,
not
actually.
exactly staking. It's closer to staking than delegation because you are putting your tokens in the ring.
So if you look at the white paper, there's something called the .vote consensus mechanism.
I'll bring up those screens. I'll share them in the general.
The point I was trying to make is that it seems to me that it's really important to create a strong argument as why DAOs shouldn't try to go and create their own voting system. And it looks like here we have a ton of points that create that differentiation. But if you're talking to DAOs that are technically inclined, they're likely thinking, hey, how hard can it be?
This is a year's work and years of research on Dr. Nick's part. So I think that is one of the answers. And there are going to be groups that will want to build their own tech. That's especially in crypto, but in anything. But there are going to be, especially like in the NFT space, and this is why we need to decide who our core audiences are, who are not as technically inclined, or communities. This is another point: is we need to start reaching out beyond the crypto space. This tech, all you need, if we can help on ramping to Web3, there's so many places this tech could go.
Sorry, can you see my screen again?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Guide.
So like DeFi is probably the hardest target audience because yes, everyone DeFi likes to build their own tech, kind of known.
Yeah. So something like a outreach focus or bring in people who ordinarily wouldn't be in there.
Yeah, I think artists collaboratives and just groups of friends, even like there's people who coordinate. There's schools like primary schools where they coordinate to buy stuff for each other. There's so many areas where coordination and distribution of funds is needed.
Curation and creation,
which are extremely important differentiation. Those words are way too close.
I guess they're close for a reason. The other thing I've added here, which might be incredibly simple to do and add a whole load of additional utility to the token, I've called it token-based semantic signaling. And this is, the original idea was that you could use your tokens. There's going to be some people who just don't want to mint an NFT and get involved in the nitty-gritty of day-to-day governance of a DAO, but want to buy the token and essentially contribute to the ecosystem financially, but not necessarily get their hands dirty too much. And there's a fallback here, which looks a bit like essentially a pie chart where you can take your token stake but you could split your so we've got yield, influence, etc., and then weight your token stake as a signal.
Your screen doesn't seem to be displaying.
Is it not? Okay. It said, how does the stream go? So this is actually quite different mechanic than we've got in influence at the moment. But if you could snapshot your tokens and do this, so let's say you've got 1 million tokens, you would be signaling to the DAO your preferences of what tags people should focus on. I'm going to weight 30% of my stack on yield. And what you're doing here is signaling your preferences, and that can have an influence on, as a kind of global governance level.
Yeah,
Gives
that's
the
really
token
interesting.
holders.
It's like a fund. It's like when you have a kind of portfolio in a fund, signal, I want this split.
Yeah, so
Right.
basically what is the DAO working on? So we can have everything from the apps to community.
Yeah, you have a kind of, if you want to rebalance your portfolio or something, you put in percentages of the portfolio that go to different tokens.
No, I'm seeing it as part of influence. So the stack is essentially token holders, citizens, parliament. So the token holders are your passive participants in the DAO. Like, I don't want a citizen ID. I don't want to vote on all the nitty gritty of how influence is built and the token economics of it, and et cetera, et cetera. I just want to signal with my stack which apps I want you to work on, or which areas of business I want you to work on. And I'll just do it once a year. It's a signal to the governance on what, it's almost like the priority vote that comes from the token holders. It's like a rolling, consistent priority vote. Yeah. Yeah, it's the token holders telling the DAO what they want the DAO to do. And I think this is really important and addresses one of the major critiques of decentralized governance, which is no one wants to do decentralized governance. No one gives a shit, apart from a small number of people who really want to get their hands dirty on this sort of stuff. And it gives token holders access to governance that's very lightweight but meaningful. So it's a new kind of vote, really.
They would still need to go in at some stage and declare this in a sort of semantic ballot. It just that they could maybe do it once a 6 months. And we'd take reference from it. So we'd go, okay, they're almost like investors, token holders, right? It's that those people who are like, oh, we want you to work on this. We think this is the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also wondering that, because if we have a vote with the active users and it comes out completely opposite to what the token holders have signaled,
it could influence the treasury dynamics. So you can imagine at some point in the future, we're at the point where the money flow from the treasury flies to these different tags. It could influence the amount of money that can be spent on each of these things.
Okay. So it'd be more like the DMF.
Yeah, it's again, experimental idea, but it's addressing this notion that most people don't want to get involved in the nitty gritty of governance. But ultimately, the token holders are the ones with the base level of power in the system. We could do this right now. Actually, we could set up a token weighted, FVT weighted vote and do the priority vote with it.
I think when we did the priority vote, we did do both. We did one with NFTs and one with token weights, but it was actually in the previous version, so I'm not sure we can go back and look at it. But I think it's worth doing it again now. Maybe we can publish all these discussions we're having this week, and from this, people can make an educated vote.
Essentially, what we'll need to do is create the first set of semantic tags, and do a priority vote, which is token weighted.
Yeah, I think the semantic tags we're going to have to start making to get on track with influence, with all these wonderful ideas that we've come up with, getting them executed just on a practical level in the next 8 to 12 weeks. We're going to have to start this quite soon. So I think we said maybe Thursday we'd put up a vote.
Yeah. There's going to be, I think we're going to have a number of votes coming out.
The binary vote will be on markets, I think.
I'm treating it as a kind of, should we do a relaunch? And this is what
I have a question about the multidimensionality of this type of voting. I guess I'd like it similar to Discord roles. You're the DAO leaders, so in any vote, let's say you get much higher weighting than somebody like me who came in off the street. But building from that, is there a way to integrate into that vote also? Let's say if I'm creative director, so in a creative vote, my weight is higher, but in a governance vote, your weight is higher, something like that.
Yeah, so this is an idea which I call informed consensus, which is you have domain weighted votes. So if you gain a role such as designer, and we have a tag for design, then you could potentially have a significantly higher vote related to your ID for design.
So we talked about this being built like into the task board dynamics. So if you, for example, took on 4 design tasks, you are basically proving your knowledge in that space. And like Nick, this is something we talked about before we even started this. This was one of the first things we discussed.
It's actually incredibly disruptive idea because it's a reframing of democracy from one person, one vote to actually the people who have the most say about an issue have proven that they know about the issue. It's informed consensus. So
we'd want that peer-reviewed consensus. That person actually is an expert in their domain, and not just they've got some letters beside their name, for example. Or
and that's therein lies the rabbit hole, which is what you end up with is this like fractal problem, which is how do you prove that person has that reputation? How do you prove that person is good at design? And then you've got who decides that person is good at design. You almost end up with this kind of anthropic problem of someone's got to be the original designer to make the first decision that person is a good designer. But yeah, it's utterly game-changing thing, which if we get to, we change the world. But
I'd love to get into that, to be honest, because it's like what you were saying. It's like this. It's the educational piece, really. And the moment you have a big community, so if we have a huge community at some point, then we can really start doing this, where people take on tasks, the community approve. So it's not like me, for example, coming and saying, "Oh, that's a good design." It's voted on by the community, and then once you've hit some sort of like amount, then you are approved as a creative in the space.
Yes,
and it's all peer reviewed.
Roles are potentially the way to. I think the roles and the mini DAO structure gets you into that. So, for example, data DAO, you turn up and build a little Python script or a June dashboard that significantly adds value to the conversation about our data. Then you get assigned the role of an analyst, for example. And then that means on data-related conversations, you have 10x the voting power or something to your average non-data analyst.
I think we can play with that soon, actually. Especially, I was thinking on the design stuff, we can, for example, have a few options for the new interface for influence and put that up for a vote.
Yeah.
And then depending on people's roles, they could have more or less voting power.
Yeah. So I've put a rather nebulous bucket of reputation builder, which is a rabbit hole. And I think we're going to have to draw a line. But what I think we can do is have some kind of role-based system for mini DAOs. So all we need to do to demonstrate that is here's a role that has elevated voting power on these tags, those tags alone.
Yeah, so then we cross it across to the tags in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And the tags could maybe be based off of what I'm hearing is proof of work. Once we can, you crack proof of work, that whole rabbit hole of proof of work, because then I've done 1,000 design tasks, let's say. So in 40 years, I may be a master of my craft.
Yes, I called it proof of wisdom.
Proof of wisdom. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking my question.
Yeah, no, it's an idea that I've been thinking about for a long time. I don't talk about it much because it's down the line a little bit, but we are strikingly close to it, I think. So yeah, if we can build that in, let's do it. All right, we've overrun a little bit, but I think it's a good place to park this. Has anyone got any final thoughts or things that haven't made it into the conversation that they would like in there? Awesome. I think that was a really good session. I think we need to revisit this again for some of the other apps. Tomorrow, we've got a workshop on our branding and messaging, which is, I think, it's going to be a really important one. So there's going to be a really creative co-design session where we get a bit blue skies and wacky with it. So we'll do that.
We'll have a few tasks for you guys to play around with.
Might lead to some competitions and other sorts of things as well.
So we'll start creating tomorrow. And I think we should probably set up a session like we did today, a 2-part session for Mint.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. No, it's actually the unit of analysis, if you like, for that is the DAO suite as a whole. My instinct is that we need to get moving on the messaging more quickly. What do you think, Naomi?
Yeah, I was just considering it. I don't think they need to be that tied because we know what the apps do generally. And like when we are talking about messaging, what we're actually going to try and stay away from is talking about each app individually and more
Yeah.
the DAO suite as a product and FVT as a brand. We're going to try and keep away from these kind of details. And I think doing day after day these intense sessions on products can be quite tiring as well. So it might be nice to do a more creative thing tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. When we were planning that session, we framed the questions about actively steering people away from individual conversations on the dApps. It's about who we are and our broad vision and direction and imagining where we want to go and what we want to be perceived as in people's heads when they first come to us. So it's very high level.
I'll send over a little document with an agenda of what we're planning tomorrow. I'll send it over later today, just so you guys know where our thinking is at with it. But yeah, it's identity, positioning, blue skies thinking of what this vision is, what is the future for finance.vote and the future for DAOs. So yeah, much more kind of creative thinking session, and we'd love everyone to have a voice in it as well. And after the session, because it's not always easy for everyone to talk during it, we'll leave these tasks open and then we'll revisit it next week and we can review what everyone's created.
Yeah, and remember, this is a 12-week thing. This is an ongoing process, and we'll be doing this, continually. I would say I'd be happy if we can get through all the dApps in about 3 weeks. That would be ideal.
This is why we need to organize them in the order that the most work needs to be done on them.
Yeah, so some of them, like Bank, for example, it's not been out in the market long enough yet for us to have the kind of what we want. It's ready to go as is almost. So that's
it is version 2.0 as well compared to the other apps. It is already had an upgrade. It's in a really good state. Yeah, it needs more use. Yeah, and yield. I think there's a few pieces that could be done to improve it for the launch, but
I think we could bundle those two together into one session.
Yeah, and then there's the decision whether we want to talk about auction.
Yeah, which again is it's a different conversation, isn't it? But yeah, I think let's just keep plowing through them. The important thing is that we use these conversations to get to that product design thing, which gets the developers into a very coherent track to work on for the next 12 weeks.
Yeah, so influence, we'll continue with like product meetings on influence and getting the developers, and I guess we can circle back with a kind of feedback on what we've decided to put into process for the launch from everything we've discussed today.
Absolutely. All righty, I'm actually late for a meeting, so I'm going to have to jump off. But yeah, great session, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.